Can you hear me? Okay, then I know the drill. I know I'm supposed to ask a question. So I'm just going to ask my question and I'm going to pretend I can read your lips when you answer. So this is a very appropriate, I think, question considering where we are in a world hopefully coming out of COVID. So the question is, we wanted to move our mom closer to us prior to COVID, and since then, obviously, we've been shut down. So we want to revisit that alternative, and we're looking at assisted housing because our place is too small. So where do we start to find a good assisted living alternatives? Like, where do we go to start looking for that? Right. Excellent. Sorry, I can't hear you right now.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm unable to hear you. Okay, hi, Mary. Right, sure. Right. Well, yeah, in the simplest form, the whole idea is when someone can't care for themselves and they don't have the proper estate planning documents in place, the only option is to have a court-appointed person handle the financial and personal and medical aspects of a person's care. And that's what a conservator is. Now, some states call it guardians. In California, a conservatorship is for an adult, a guardianship is for a minor. So when we're talking conservatorships, we're talking about an adult. So what it does is it puts in place someone who is there to manage financial matters if they're a conservator of the estate, and the health and care of the person if they have conservatorship of the person. Typically, someone will have both, but in some cases, a person only needs one. Maybe they need just conservatorship of the estate. If you have someone who is otherwise, competent, they know how to function and can care for themselves, but they might be subject to undue influence very easily. You don't have to have dementia in order to have conservatorship. You just have one of the grounds would be unable to avoid undue influence. So, in other words, you could be perfectly competent to take care of yourself, to take your own medications and care for yourself and do everything, but you might be susceptible to undue influence. And that's where a conservator of the estate would be appropriate. Uh, in some cases, someone might be competent to handle their financial affairs, but can't handle their care for their health and that type of thing, and you get a conservatorship of the person. But more than likely, you get both. So. Right. And yeah, fortunately in California, we have private professional fiduciaries who fill that role many times when there's a conflict, when someone can't handle it, when there can't be agreement among family members. Many times the court will encourage them to come to an agreement on a private professional to handle those things. Yeah, what they do. Yeah, so in California, we have, it's under the Department of Consumer Affairs, we have what are called licensed private professional fiduciaries, licensed fiduciaries. And they have training. They have to have a certain amount of education. They have to have ongoing, continuing education. They have to pass an exam, and they have to be licensed every year. And once they are licensed, then they can act in that role, and their roles vary. They could be a conservator, they could be a trustee, they could be an administrator, executor. They have a number of roles they can fulfill. When you're talking of conservatorship, you're always talking about something that's under the supervision of the court. So they have to, and conservatorships are very complicated, and you need someone that really knows what they're doing to navigate the court in that regard. I'm sorry, go ahead if you have a question. Oh, well, it is, and conservatorships are a very tricky thing because, as you mentioned, nobody wants one. And typically when the need arises for one, it's at a time when someone is not necessarily unable to care for themselves. They think they still can, and they think they're doing. So you have a situation where a child may, can see what the parent is doing or the adult is doing and hurting themselves, and the parent doesn't see it as hurting themselves. For an example, I'll give you an example, because we handle, I do a lot of litigation in this area, and we have all types of cases, caregivers involved in someone's care. Sometimes a caregiver, if they're not handled through an agency that's vetted, you run into all kinds of problems. Right, yeah. Exactly, and that's why we always have to have, care manager that deals with the, knows the agencies to use, because when you hire somebody individually, you have a lot of problems. Yeah, there's all types of issues when you have it hired privately. Labor, wage and labor laws being the biggest, as well as workers' compensation issues, that type of thing. Not to mention the undue influence that sometimes leaks into that. So, but yes, but the problem with conservatorships is many times when you're trying to help that person, they look at it as you interfering with their life, and they resent it. So, for example, had a situation once where we had a elderly woman who her gardener befriended her, and so she they became, or she thought they became, very good friends, and he took advantage of that situation. Pretty soon she was writing checks that she shouldn't have written, but she thought they were friends, and was trying to help him. He'd give her a sad story and she'd write a check, basically to the point of giving away all of her cash. Her son, in the meantime, tried to do everything. He called Adult Protective Services. He talked, and she thought he was interfering with her life. He didn't know what to do. And she, in essence, basically gave away most of her cash to this person who fed on her vulnerability. Exactly. It's exactly what it was. She thought it was her boyfriend at that point. He was married, of course, but and so he'd had no problem taking advantage and fixing up his house. Anyway, ultimately we got a private professional fiduciary appointed as conservator, and then we're able to get access to all her bank records and found out that she had written out probably over $200,000 worth of checks, which was almost all of her money. But she fought the whole time, saying that, and so when the police came out, or Adult Protective Services, and all they ask is everything okay? It's like, yeah, he's my friend. That's what I want to do. And they say, fine. They close the case. So there's nothing. Anyway, So when we looked into it and we saw how it was going, it looked like an elder abuse case. So under elder abuse, you can file a prejudgment writ. So we recorded a writ right away, proceeded with the action, and ultimately, because we filed the writ and put basically a lien on his property, he was in the process of selling it and he was in escrow. He had fixed up his property with her money and was going to sell it. But because we filed the lien, he couldn't go anywhere with it. And so we were able to recover for her and get him, dealt with him. Right. Well, that was because in the whole time, her son who was trying to help her was getting nowhere because she was competent enough to appear competent enough, but she couldn't resist undue influence. And so she was hurting herself. So she literally lost all of her cash that she had. And it was her house that we had to, so fortunately we were able to get some back. So. Yeah. In that regard, yeah. Right. It is. Yeah, it is. It is going to court. Um, I go to the caregiver situation because this particular case was unusual. My client hired a private caregiver to care for a family friend. But the caregiver she hired wasn't a stranger, it was someone that took care of my client's mother for like 10 years. So she knew her really well. And so this family friend, asked my client to help her, as she aged, and they did, and they helped her. So when she needed someone to stay with her or to care for her, she used the same person she used for the last 10 years. Well, about a year or so after that, the woman passed away. And on the day of the funeral, she hands my client an envelope. And in the envelope is an amendment to the trust, an amendment, and what are called certificates of independent review by other attorneys. And so my client, who was the longtime friend and was the trustee of her trust and was the beneficiary, on the day of the funeral, she gets handed this amendment. And what happened was within less than a month after this woman started working for her, she took her to an attorney and had the attorney, and they drew up an amendment and gave everything to the caregiver. And the caregiver, and also then did another amendment to make her the trustee. She never said anything to anyone. And the elderly person didn't quite understand. She kept telling my client, says, I think I did something wrong, but I don't know. And they go, what'd you do? She's, yeah. And she says, she says, I didn't, she couldn't even understand what she had done. And there was nothing to indicate that. And so she was worried, but they didn't know why. Well, it turns out that she took her to the attorney. Then when a caregiver gets a gift, it's deemed void, from the outset, unless you get what's called a certificate of independent review by another attorney, a third party. So she had this reviewed by another attorney, and he said, then they interviewed her and they said, okay, this is what she wants to do. And he signed a certificate of independent review. And they actually got a second independent review of the amendment by another attorney. So we had three attorneys who said this is what she wanted to do. So we knew that that wasn't what she wanted to do, and we just couldn't figure it out. And I can't believe that three attorneys would be, do anything intentional, because they didn't seem to be, it wasn't like they gained anything from it. So we dug into it. Yeah, so we dug into it and we looked into it and challenged it on the grounds of undue influence. And California has one of the first statutes defining undue influence under the Welfare and Institutions Code. In any event, what we found out was the attorneys really didn't inquire enough to understand or how to be able to identify what undue influence is. For example, no, they did probate and they did different things, but no one was really a specialist. No one was certified as a specialist. The bottom line is they didn't ask the questions. They didn't know that my client was a longtime friend. They thought she was another paid caregiver. They assumed that this caregiver who was becoming the beneficiary was a longtime friend and had known her for a long time. So when I asked them questions about, would it surprise you if I told you he only knew her for a month? Would you have gone with it? He goes, oh no, if I knew that, I never would have said that this was okay. So they just didn't ask the right questions. They basically asked the elder, is this what you want to do? And she said, yes. Right. Yeah. But never got into the details of who are these people and who are you, writing out of your will. So they didn't ask the right questions. So when we got in there and I subpoenaed records and I got their appointment books, and the caregiver said she had no role in this. She didn't know anything about it. But when I got their appointment books, it was her name and phone number in the appointment books, not the elderly person's. Right. When we mapped out, because my client would go visit this woman every day. That's why this was particularly unique. It wasn't as though she was rarely there. She was there every day. But when we mapped everything out, we discovered that every time she went to a lawyer, it was at a time when my client was unavailable. She was either in the hospital with having surgery, or she was away on vacation for a few days or whatever. So every time she went, it was timed so that my client couldn't show up that day. So it was very, very calculated. And so when we put this whole thing together, we were able to throw out the amendments and throw out the certificates of independent review by two attorneys. And and they all had to, testify. So we had a parade of lawyers. We had probably over 6 lawyers testify in that trial. So, but we got everything back. It was a good outcome, yes, yeah. But it goes to show how tricky this whole area is, because you're not, it's right, or even the, because I put on someone to testify as an expert as to really what you need to look at with respect to evaluating for undue influence. What do you need to look at? And we don't have guidelines for that. And so it's very tricky. Sure. Well, you can, yeah, and if I got a moment, I'll tell you one way to avoid it. And I tell people, conservatorships can be avoided if you have a good power of attorney healthcare directive and a financial power of attorney. You still will have problems if there's a fight among family members, but in some situations, most situations, that's all you need, because if you have a financial power, that person can make financial decisions and handle your personal affairs financially, and healthcare handles that. And that goes for anybody, whether or not you even have an estate. Because I have a situation in a conservatorship where the conservatee is, barely, at the time he went into it, was in his mid-30s. And he had, at the time of, we got it established this, he only had about $2,000 in the bank and owned a pickup truck. So he didn't think he had a need for a conservatorship. Well, he got into a catastrophic accident, which involved a lot of litigation. And so the only way to do that was to get a conservatorship appointed and a conservator appointed, and the process. So that was happened. They pursued all kinds of litigation because of the personal injury. He now has, unfortunately, he's physically not doing well, but his estate is huge. If he had a power of attorney and a healthcare directive, we could have avoided the conservatorship process altogether. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, and parents with the older kids that travel abroad and do things, if they need something and they don't have power of attorney in hand, it's going to be tricky because once they're 18, the parent doesn't have any say over anything. So, right, 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 right. That's correct. Yeah. You're welcome. Well, thank you for having me. All right. Thank you very much. Okay. Bye-bye.
There we go.
Now I hear you.
You know why? Because I muted myself. So maybe you didn't hear me during the whole show, huh?
I didn't
Did
hear
you
a
hear
word
Phil?
you said, but whatever you were saying, you said it with a lot of conviction, Mary Winters.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, one of these days I will get these buttons down.
I like to know glasses look.
Oh, well, sometimes, if I'm really fast with my clicks, I can avoid that, but I still use them behind the scenes so that I can read some of my little birthday things and so forth. So anyway, anything exciting for the weekend?
I'm going to find out in about 1 hour. We actually are starting a jury trial
Oh,
that's supposed to start on the 21st of June, but we're waiting to hear back. We have an FSC ongoing, so we're going to see if we're going to start on time. So if we start our jury trial, which it's the first jury trial I've been a part of since COVID started, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and where we get a jury pulled from and
sure.
how we work logistically within a courtroom. But yeah, so if the trial goes on the 21st, then I will be in my office where I am right now.
All right. Well,
How about you?
good. I'm going to be here, so
Yeah.
I'll be around if anybody has an emergency. I'll be around. I can help.
Excellent. Let's get to the Rose Bowl.
All right. Yeah, we can walk around the Rose Bowl. So
Yeah.
go ahead and say goodbye, and I'll go ahead and play our little.
Before
Uh-huh.
before you do, I wanted to add, if I can, we had Melinda on a couple months ago.
Yes.
And and so I've been working out with her, and it's been amazing. So and I texted her a while ago, and she would love to come back and be on the show.
I want to have her on in a regular feature. In fact, I spoke with Herbie Pilato, who has written multiple books on some of our favorite old celebrities. He was very good friends with, oh my gosh, she was our little bewitched lady, Elizabeth Montgomery. And
Really? Yeah.
agreed to do a regular segment and come on and talk about some of the celebrities that he's worked with and written about. So I think that's going to be fun too. And,
yeah, definitely.
So yeah, we're
and happy Flag Day to everybody. June 14th, Flag Day. Fly your flag.
Yes. Sounds great. All right. Well, have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks for viewing.
Bye, Mary.
Bye.